Conflict. I'm sure you've all been involved in a conflict at some point in your lives. Whether it was a small disagreement about where to eat for dinner, or a bigger issue like where to live, we can all understand conflict and relate it to our own lives in some way. For some cultures, conflict is simply a way of life that is expected each and every day. The difference, though, is that the citizens within these nations aren't even a part of the conflict, but they must endure the consequences of it. This presentation is going to focus on what conflict is, the different levels of conflict and how they relate to the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, and the ways in which conflict can be resolved. First, what is conflict? Conflict is any discord of action, feeling, or effect, antagonism or opposition as of interest or principles. This understanding of conflict lays the foundation for the rest of the chapter. There are many different types of conflict you can have, but perhaps the most relevant for this class is intercultural conflict. Intercultural conflict is a disagreement based on culture or between multiple cultural groups. Now that we have discussed what conflict is in its most basic form, we can discuss the different layers of conflict. Chapter 9 of our class text goes into 3 different levels of conflict: the micro, meso, and macro frames. The micro frame of conflict focuses on interpersonal interactions and cultural attitudes towards conflict. Micro levels of conflict can be affected by the type of culture someone is from, as well as situational factors such as time, occasion, and attitude. There can be confusion between the two parties of conflict if they have different understandings of verbal or nonverbal communication. The mesoframe of conflict is centered around prejudices and racism. It relies heavily on an us versus them approach to conflict. The conflict forms because of prejudices, and the separate groups have a strong sense of group identity in relation to culture. The group that might be the majority tends to lack the knowledge necessary to truly understand what it is the minority needs. The macro level of conflict is the largest scale of conflict the text discusses. The macro level also utilizes an us versus them approach, but in a more extreme way. It is also different because the conflict rarely involves direct interaction between the two groups, and it relies heavily on the media to gain information about the opposition. The macro frame focuses on big picture issues like economy and politics that are rooted in disagreement through cultural backgrounds. A relevant example of a macro frame conflict is the one between the Israelis and Palestinians. The conflict between Israel and Palestine is one that has been going on for generations, and while it appears on the surface to be a religious war, it is ultimately a fight for land. However, the 3 different levels of conflict can easily be applied to this situation to help gain a better understanding of the issue at hand. On the micro level, Israelis and Palestinians refuse to interact with one another in a personal way. Neither side will make time for the other, or even talk to someone of the opposing background because of the differences they understand that they have. On the meso level, the Palestinians have experienced the conflict as a minority or less powerful side. They have a strong group identity because of the oppression that has been inflicted upon them by Israeli forces and individuals. The restriction of movement is one example of the deliberate oppression of the Palestinians. Israel maintained onerous restrictions on the movement of Palestinians in the West Bank, including checkpoints and the separation barrier, in combination of wall and fence in the West Bank that Israel said it built for security reasons. Israeli-imposed restrictions designed to keep Palestinians far from settlements forced them to take time-consuming detours and restricted their access to agricultural land. Palestinians have experienced this type of oppression in several ways, but most commonly the restriction of movement. The two sides cannot peacefully engage in conversation due to the severe power imbalance between the two. Finally, on the macro level, there are countless ways in which the economic and political institutions have been affected by the conflict. The Israeli government continued to enforce severe and discriminatory restrictions on Palestinians' human rights, restrict the movement of people and goods into and out of the Gaza Strip, and facilitate the unlawful transfer of Israeli citizens to settlements in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli government is doing everything in its power to debilitate Palestinian forces. The conflict has affected individuals, groups, and entire nations. Neighboring countries have had to alter their border protection in order to appease the Israelis, and other countries have spent millions of dollars and countless years in effort to reach a peace agreement. While there may not be peace in the near future, there are several things that can be done to facilitate peace and resolution. Intercultural conflict resolution relies on intercultural praxis. Last week we looked into intercultural praxis, but did not focus heavily on how to utilize it to resolve conflict. There are several methods of intercultural praxis through which a conflict can be resolved. They are inquiry, framing, positioning, dialogue, reflection, and action. Each of these steps to conflict resolution are crucial, and if applied correctly to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, could be the solution to a century-old problem. So in conclusion, conflict is something that we all experience at some point in life. This presentation has gone over what conflict is, the different levels of conflict, and how they relate to the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, and different ways to resolve conflict. Use the topics and concepts covered in this video and apply them to your own life in order to better understand the conflict around you and how to solve it. Thank you.